Hi everyone. So today my presentation is going to be about the botany behind medical treatments and pharmacology. So plants have been used for millennia as a treatment for different ailments in different ways. And over time, and especially in the last 100 years and the last couple of decades, there's been a lot of research into medicines derived from plants. And the practice of seeing how plants can be used in the pharmaceutical industry is known as ethnopharmacology. So plants synthesize primary metabolites and secondary metabolites. Primary metabolites are things like glucose and amino acids, which are used directly for plant growth. And secondary metabolites are chemicals which help the plant survive better in its environment, like an evolutionary bonus, which is why we use secondary metabolites in medicine. They're split into four main groups: phenolic compounds, terpenoids, alkaloids, and sulfur-containing compounds. And most of these are poisonous because of their ability to interact with the cell structure and prevent protein synthesis that's important in the cell, such as DNA replication. So primarily, it's the top three that are used in medicine making, but sulfur-containing compounds are also being used to study their neuroprotective properties. And plants make these compounds largely to prevent herbivory, because if they're poisonous, animals won't eat them. So as I said, most of the metabolites that are used in medicine making are poisonous. So oftentimes it is that the most poisonous plants are used as the best medicines. So the reason that they're poisonous to begin with is, as I said, because of the impact on the cell structure. But this can be used in medicine, such as for treatments for cancer and malaria. In malarial cells, poisonous alkaloids and terpenoids are able to break down the structure of the malarial cell, and in cancer cell, secondary metabolites are able to cause apoptosis. So an example of this that we learn in GCSE and A-level is foxglove, which gives the chemical digoxin, which is poisonous because it interferes with the conduction of the cells in the heart, which causes irregular heartbeats. But it's the same reason why it's used to make medicine that helps with cardiac problems. And another really important example in medicine is the deadly nightshade, also known as Atropa belladonna, from which we derive the chemical atropine. Atropine is one of the most important medicines in many fields of science. For example, it's used in surgery as a light sedative and also to dilate pupils for procedures that need access to the back of the eye. Injections of atropine are used to help with cardiac problems, and increasingly we are experimenting with chemicals like atropine and finding derivatives of them. For example, tiotropium, which is used to treat COPD. So as I said, atropine is one of the essential medicines, and there's actually a list of essential and basic medicines by the World Health Organization. And on that list, 11% of all medicine is made from flowering plants, not to mention the ones that are made from non-flowering plants. So the medicine that we depend on every day and in different fields in different medical fields heavily depends on plants as a background. For example, atropine, as I said, and paclitaxel and vinblastine, which are cancer-treating medicines, which I will also discuss. On the essential medicines list, several medicines such as morphine, codeine, and opium come from the same plant, such as the opium poppy. So morphine is pretty common. It's used as a sedative and a strong painkiller, and it's used in surgery, common pain relief, and geriatrics. For a long time, people didn't know that things like morphine could be addictive, which is something that the person who invented morphine found out when he became addicted to it after testing it on himself. Increasingly, we are doing experiments on things like morphine, as they're so common now in medicine. And from this, we have found even more chemicals, such as apomorphine, which is being studied to treat Parkinson's disease. So the ability of secondary metabolites like atropine and morphine to be derived into other chemicals and other drugs is something that is relatively new, and it increases the possibilities of more drugs being made from the ones that we already have. So apart from the really famous ones like morphine, there's also some common plants to us that are also being used to revolutionize medicine. For example, daffodils and snowdrops. Would anyone like to guess what they used to treat?
Daffodils.
Yeah, daffodils. Yeah? No, not cancer. Yeah?
It's either Alzheimer's or Parkinson's.
Yeah, Alzheimer's. It's used to treat Alzheimer's. So both daffodils and snowdrops contain the chemical galantamine, which slows the progression of Alzheimer's disease. Yeah, and it does this by slowing the decline of chemical transitions in the brain. Then this plant is quite common as well. It's flowering right now, so you might have seen it. It's known as the Vinca minor periwinkle, and it produces the drug lacicine or vincamine, depending on where you see it. And this acts as a cerebral stimulant, so it's also being used to prevent brain degenerative diseases such as dementia. And lastly, this is the cotton plant, and it's used in male contraceptive pills. Other than the more common medicines, I found it really interesting how many of the cancer treatments we use every day are made directly from plants. So these are some common plants in other areas of the world which are used to make cancer treatments. The top one is the Pacific yew, which is used to make paclitaxel, and this is a drug that has been used for many years to treat ovarian, lung, and breast cancers. It was discovered in the 1960s as one of the best drugs for cancer treatments because it had a success rate of 75 to 80% and above. And a bit after that, we discovered the drugs vincristine and vinblastine from the Madagascar periwinkle, which grows quite abundantly in areas like in India, as from my own personal experience. Sadly, with certain plants, we don't understand how they make their secondary metabolites, such as vinblastine, which is why we still use the plant itself to make these drugs. So 500 kilograms of dried leaves of the Madagascar periwinkle used to make just 1 gram of vinblastine, which means that such medicines, even though they're really good and really effective, they can't be used in countries with low income where they can't afford it. This was actually found, this cancer medicine was found because in the 1950s, the Madagascar periwinkle was tested for its anti-diabetic purposes, which the native Madagascan people had been using it for. And when it was fed to rabbits to test their anti-diabetic purposes, it killed them because it lowered the white blood cell count to, they just contracted diseases and they couldn't fight against it. So from that, it was theorized that it actually acted against cancers of the white blood cells, such as lymphoma, which is how it's used today. So yeah, as I said, the ancient Madagascans used that plant for anti-diabetic purposes, and through history we have found more examples of medicinal recipes, such as this Sumerian clay tablet, which dictates, I think, around 250 medicinal recipes, and only a handful of them have been tested so far. Also, Ayurveda and ancient Chinese medical practices are being used more and more as a starting point for research. Yeah, and this was one of the best examples of how ancient medical practices can be used in drug trials was by Tu Youyou, who won the Nobel Prize for Medicine in 2015 because she and her team discovered the drug artemisinin based on ancient Chinese texts, thousands of them that she studied, which led to the plant sweet wormwood, and this is used to treat malaria. It's one of the most effective medicines for malaria that we have ever had, and it's made from actually a really common plant. Before the discovery of artemisinin, many antimalarial drugs had been used with differing values of toxicity and efficacy, and they would all somehow fail in the end, as the plasmodium would develop resistance to them. However, artemisinin has been going on for several decades now, and it's been doing pretty well. And this was because she based her research on ancient Chinese texts. And it has been found that the basing medical trials on ancient medicinal herbal medicines has been able to reduce the toxicity of the drug produced while increasing the efficacy of it. So apart from looking back into history to derive drugs, biotechnology and genetics has come a long way in the last 100 years. So there have been biotechnological advancements to increase the use of plants in medicine making, and one of these ways is biofarming, which is where we have taken already existing plants and genetically modified them with the genes of other plants we know to make really important medicines. For example, the cannabis plant is really easily modified, and there have been attempts to implant the cannabis DNA with DNAs from things like the Madagascar periwinkle to increase the amount of drugs that they make, so it can be farmed more easily. And then genetic modification can also be done, obviously, to increase yield and increase the potency of the final drug. And even more recently, the studies and mapping of different plant genomes has increased the understanding and development of how different drugs are synthesized. So in 2018, the genome of the Madagascar periwinkle was finally mapped, which gives hopes that soon we'll be able to synthesize vinblastine and vincristine from the plant, but in labs, so that we wouldn't have to rely on it anymore. And this would be really good because if we're able to synthesize these chemicals in labs as opposed to depend on the plant for them, it means that it can be done more cheaply, it will be more cost effective, and poorer areas can then access the same medicines. But despite all the biotechnological advancements and advancements in the genome studying, there are many threats to discovery of medicine from plants. It's theorized that many plants that could have been used for medicinal purposes have already become extinct. This is especially bad for plants specifically because secondary metabolites are often unique to a plant variety or the whole species, which means that if one species goes extinct, there's a chance that the drugs that are found in them will never be found again. And several species of plants have already disappeared, and up to a quarter of plant species could disappear over the next 2 to 3 decades. And one of these cases was in the 1920s, when a botanist was trekking through the Malaysian jungles and found a plant that he took back to his lab and found that it was really good at treating diabetes. But when he went back to the jungle to try to find it, he couldn't find it anymore because it had been chopped and the jungle had been destroyed. Luckily, that plant was rescued by botanical gardens nearby, but that's not the case for most plant species that are found to be useful. That's all. Thank you for listening. These are some other examples of really amazing plants which I couldn't include in the PowerPoint, but they have also been used and are being studied to make amazing